Now, don't adjust your sets. People often ask me, Thogdad, if you didn't support Bolton Wanderers, who would you support? And here's your answer, Oldham Athletic Football Club. And I'm going to talk about why that is and how 20 years ago I nearly bought the club. Now, Oldham is situated in the east of Lancashire by the border with the dreaded Yorkshire. It's a town of about 100,000 people and used to be a global centre of textile manufacture. At its peak, Oldham was the most productive cotton spinning mill town in the world. Now, the town's football club was founded in 1895 as Pine Villa Football Club, and in 1907, Oldham Athletic joined the Football League. Oldham currently sit in 19th place in Division 2, the fourth tier of English football. At the moment, things are not very good on or off the pitch. The Latics play at Boundary Park, which has a capacity of 13,500 and is famous for being cold with those winds that blow off the nearby Pennines. But at its peak, Boundary Park could hold up to 50,000 screaming Lancastrians. Oldham Athletic have a wonderful selection of celebrity fans, including Cannon and Ball, Professor Brian Cox, Philip Schofield and Paul Scholes. And according to the fans, their main rivals are Rochdale, Bolton, Huddersfield, Blackburn and Man United. And bizarrely, Oldham have one of these weird friendships with Eintracht Frankfurt of Germany. Now, the Latics have had two periods of real success in their history. The first one happened just before the First World War. In 1913, Oldham finished fourth in the old First Division. And 2 years later, in 1915, they were runners-up in the First Division, missing out on the title by just 1 point. And then the war happened. A period of decline and mediocrity continued and lasted until the 1990s. In the 1960s, an interesting character arrived at Oldham as chairman, Ken Bates. Now, Ken Bates went on to buy Wigan in 1980, and then in 1982, he bought Chelsea for £1. He went on to sell Chelsea to Roman Abramovich for £18 million, and in 2005, he bought 50% of Leeds United. But that is a story for another day. Things get interesting in 1970 when Jimmy Frizzell, a former Oldham player and a Scottish-born defender, becomes manager of Oldham. And he would stick around for 12 years, becoming one of the longest-lasting managers in the league. During Frizzell's tenure at Boundary Park, Oldham climbed a couple of divisions and even adopted the famous blue shirts of the club. Now, this was an interesting time for me, the 1970s. Now, most of you know that I'm an ardent Bolton Wanderers supporter, and I first started going to Bolton games with my parents in 1975. But when Bolton were playing away, usually we wouldn't go to the games. We'd drive down the motorway to Oldham, which is where my grandparents live. We'd have our tea and then we'd get down Boundary Park. So from the age of 7 or 8, Oldham Athletic became my second team. Now, feel free to roast me about this. Some people say you can't have a second team, but hey, it's just how life worked out for me. So I've always had a real soft spot in my heart for Oldham Athletic. Another significant event happened in 1982 when Joe Royle became manager of Oldham. And in 1986, Oldham cleverly installed a plastic pitch at Boundary Park. And this made for some interesting incidents over the years. In 1991, Oldham were playing Portsmouth at Fratton Park, and the Portsmouth manager was giving it this in the press, saying that Oldham can't play away from home. So Joe Royle cut out the article and he pinned it to the dressing room door, and he said to his players, "No team talk today, have a read of this. Get out there and beat Portsmouth." The score that day, Portsmouth 1, Oldham 4. Oldham reached the League Cup final in 1990 and they were playing Nottingham Forest. And I remember at the time I was backpacking on the border between Thailand and Burma, a really dangerous area, and I really wanted to see the final. So I had to hike about 10 miles to find a guest house with a telly that was showing the game. And I was so knackered from my hike that I fell asleep during the second half and Oldham lost 1-0. And around that time, Oldham also got into the semi-finals of the FA Cup, where they lost to Man United over 2 legs. And they'd also get to the semi-final of the FA Cup 4 years later in 1994. In 1991, Oldham finally won the division and got promoted to the top tier of English football. The only problem was they had to give up their plastic pitch. A year later, the Premier League was founded and Oldham were founder members of the Premier League. Sadly, they only lasted a couple of years in the Premier League before getting relegated. Joe Royle went off to join Everton and then Man City and Ipswich as manager. And the Oldham Athletic of this era produced a couple of great players. Dennis Irwin went to Man United for $625k and became a regular in their team for 12 years. Earl Barrett went to Aston Villa for $1.7 million in 1992. This was a record transfer fee for a defender at the time. Now things get interesting for me in 2001. Andy Ritchie is the manager. Oldham are in the third tier of English football and the finances are not looking good. Now around this time, a good friend of mine, a very wealthy guy, comes to me and says, Stephen, I'm looking at a team in England. I'm thinking about buying them. And he told me the name of the team and said, Thogdad, what do you think of Team X? And I said, look, they're famous for shoes, but not much else. But I looked at the numbers and they were terrible. And I advised my friend, go nowhere near this club. And then bizarrely, on the 31st of March 2001, I opened up the Times and there was an advert, for sale, Oldham Athletic Football Club. And the next day, which was April Fool's Day, I sent a fax to Boundary Park. That was the days of fax machines, saying I'm part of a consortium that is interested in buying Oldham Athletic. Now, let me tell you about my consortium. It involved a super rich Scandinavian guy and 3 other Scandinavian business people, all with money and all with knowledge of football. So a couple of days later, I got in the Range Rover and I drove down from Harrogate to Oldham to take a look at the club. And that involved interviewing Andy Ritchie and the directors and looking at the finances and building a business plan for the next few years. There's a thing about buying a business. It's not like going into Next and buying a t-shirt. You've got to do something called due diligence. So you look at all the numbers, you look at all the legal contracts, you meet all the people. Basically, you lift up every stone that there is to lift in the business. And this can take weeks, but normally it takes months. Now, 7 weeks later, on 22nd of May 2001, the directors of Oldham announced that they were selling the club to a guy called Chris Moore. Now, this was a guy from down south who was at the time very wealthy and had an IT business that was listed on the stock market. And fairness to Chris Moore, he moved very quickly and bought the club, so we missed out. Now, things started to go wrong fairly quickly. The following year, 2002, ITV Digital went bust. Now, this was a broadcaster that was going to bring loads of money to the game of football. And also in 2002, there was a stock market crash. The so-called internet bubble burst, and a lot of people, including Chris Moore, lost a lot of money. In 2003, Chris Moore stood down as chairman of Oldham. In 2004, Chris Moore sold the club. In 2007, Chris Moore's business went bust. In 2011, the Serious Fraud Office charged him with false accounting and fraud. And in 2013, Chris Moore went to prison for 30 months for false accounting. So in hindsight, it's fair to say that things went a little bit wrong. What would my consortium have done? Well, in fairness, who knows? We had money, we had knowledge of football, we had passion, we had a business plan. And part of that plan involved bringing really talented young players down from Scandinavia to play at Boundary Park. But this is all conjecture. Nobody knows what would have happened if I'd bought Oldham with my consortium. I would have become a director, possibly the chairman. It would have been a lot of fun, but anything else is guesswork. So after that, my consortium kind of split up. My friend went on to buy a large European team, and in retirement, he's still involved in football. What happened at Oldham Athletic? Well, in 2004, Simon Blitz, Simon Corney, and Danny Gazal bought the club. These guys were known as the Three Amigos, and by all accounts, they bought a bit of a mess and they tried their best, but there wasn't a lot of improvement on the pitch. In 2015, there was a national scandal as Oldham Athletic tried to hire alleged rapist Ched Evans, and that transfer fell through after a massive backlash from the public and a petition of 60,000 names. In 2018, Simon Corney sold the club to Moroccan football agent Abdallah Lemsaggen, and Oldham was relegated to League Two later that year. In 2019 and 2020, winding up petitions were brought by HMRC against Oldham Athletic, and in 2020 Oldham very nearly went into administration. There is massive fan discontent with the owners, and the very future of Oldham Athletic is in serious doubt. Add to that the corona pandemic, which cannot have done any good for clubs like Oldham Athletic. Now, all of this saddens me because Oldham, the town, is a part of my DNA. Oldham and Lancashire runs through my bloodstream. It's a part of who I am. I feel at home when I see the hills and the old mills and the red brick terraces of this part of Lancashire. I hold dear memories of the family houses on York Avenue and Chamber Road in Werneth, Oldham. I have memories of my late Granny Kathleen brewing up the morning tea and Grandad Eddie smoking his pipe. I have joyful memories of being a football-mad young lad at a frozen boundary park in the 1970s. I remember a goalkeeper called Chris Ogden, who amusingly had the same name as my mum. I've got to know the passion and the loyalty and the decency of the Oldham fans. I'm saddened that the future of the football club is in doubt because of boardroom decisions that didn't involve the supporters. A part of the town's tradition and culture could disappear forever because of the wrong decisions made in smoke-filled rooms. Please remember what happened to Bury Football Club last year. And please tell me, why, oh why, can't we put fans first in English football? This is Thogdad. See ya.